I didn't know that a single piece of paper could make a man forget how to breathe. But it can. If you've ever raised a child, if you've ever stayed up late wondering whether you did enough, then stay with me. Because what happened next is the moment my life split cleanly in two. My son handed me an envelope. No shouting, no shaking hands. Just an envelope, plain white, the kind you'd use for a bill or a birthday card you forgot to sign. He placed it on the kitchen table between us, like he was setting down a receipt. "Read it," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that tells you the decision has already been made. I didn't open it right away. I noticed small things instead. The hum of the refrigerator. The smell of coffee going cold. The way he didn't call me Dad this time. Not even once. When I finally slid my finger under the flap, the paper inside felt heavier than it should have been. Just one sheet. One sentence. Written in his handwriting. Neat, controlled, familiar. "Dad, I'm not your son." I read it twice, then a third time. My first thought wasn't anger. It wasn't denial either. It was confusion. Quiet, disorienting confusion. Like waking up in a room you don't recognize, but you're sure you've lived in for decades. I looked up at him. He didn't look away. "What is this?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes steady. "It's exactly what it says." I waited for more, for an explanation, for a crack in his voice. There was none. "You're saying, what?" I said slowly. "That I'm saying," he cut in, "that I don't believe you're my biological father." There it was, clean, clinical, delivered like a diagnosis. I felt something inside my chest tighten, not sharply, but steadily, like a knot being pulled one careful inch at a time. 37 years. That's how long I'd been his father. 37 years of scraped knees, school lunches, late-night drives, tuition payments, phone calls that started with, "Dad, I need..." And now this. "You don't believe," I said, tasting the words. "Or you know." He shrugged, just slightly. "Does it matter?" That question landed harder than anything else he could have said. Then he added, almost gently, "And before you say anything else, I need you to understand something. Even if you did raise me, I didn't ask for that." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," he said, "you chose to do those things. You chose to stay. You chose to pay. That was your decision, not a debt I owe." That was the moment. Not the envelope, not the sentence on the paper. That sentence right there. Everything I had given, every sacrifice, every night I worked late, every time I put myself second, had just been reclassified. Not as love, not as responsibility, but as a personal preference, like a hobby. I felt my mouth open, then close again. I realized I didn't actually know what to say to a man who could erase a lifetime with such precision. So I did the only thing I could do. I folded the letter once, then again, slowly, carefully, as if it were fragile. And in that silence, with my own son watching me like a stranger, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just a family argument. This was the beginning of a revenge story. One I hadn't chosen, but one I was now standing inside. And I hadn't even reached the part where I lost my home yet. He didn't raise his voice. That was the part that stayed with me. He sat there across the kitchen table, shoulders relaxed, fingers loosely wrapped around his coffee mug, like we were discussing weather or traffic. not the slow erasing of a man's entire life. "I need you to understand something," he said, "before this turns into emotions." That word, emotions, like they were an inconvenience. I waited. "You raised me," he continued, nodding once, as if acknowledging a minor detail on a form. "I'm not denying that, but you chose to do it. I never asked you to." The sentence landed quietly. No drama, no cruelty in his tone, just certainty. I felt my jaw tighten. "You're saying," "I'm saying," he interrupted gently, "that doing something because you want to doesn't automatically make it someone else's obligation." There it was. The logic. Clean, modern, unassailable on the surface. I stared at the grain of the table between us. I'd sanded that table myself years ago, back when my hands were steadier. Back when he still called me Dad without hesitation. "So all those years," I said slowly, choosing each word like it might cut me if I wasn't careful. "They don't mean anything to you?" "They mean something," he said quickly. "Just not in the way you're framing it." I looked up. "Then how?" He exhaled, as if explaining something obvious. "They mean you lived your life the way you wanted to. You decided to be there. You decided to provide. That doesn't create a debt." A debt. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I'd never once thought of love as a ledger. I hadn't kept score. I hadn't counted meals or miles or missed sleep. I'd just been there. That's what fathers did. Or at least, that's what I thought. "You're not angry," I said. "No," he replied. "I just don't want this hanging over my head. I don't want to be made to feel like I owe something I didn't sign up for." I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking softly under my weight. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Have you ever sat across from someone you love and realized you're not even speaking the same language anymore? If you're listening to this and you've ever raised a child, biological or not, you might understand the kind of silence I mean. The kind that feels heavier than shouting. "So," I said finally, "in your mind, what was I?" He hesitated, just a second too long. "Someone who helped," he said. Helped. Not father, not family. Not the man who showed up when he had nightmares, or the one who taught him how to drive on an empty church parking lot. Just someone who helped. I nodded slowly, because there wasn't anything left to argue. You can't debate your way out of being erased. And somewhere deep inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. That was when he stood up, gathered his mug, and added one last thing over his shoulder, almost as an afterthought. "I think it's better if we're honest now," he said, "before expectations get complicated." Expectations. I was still sitting there when he walked out of the room, the coffee long forgotten. The envelope folded neatly in my pocket like a receipt for a life that no longer counted. And that was the moment I understood the truth I hadn't wanted to see. This wasn't about blood. This wasn't about certainty. This was about a man who had found a way to turn gratitude into a burden, and love into a choice that no longer mattered. And once you do that, there's nothing left to talk about. He didn't say it right away. That's how I knew it mattered. We were standing in the hallway when he finally mentioned the room. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place with history in it. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have on the hardwood floor, like I was a guest who hadn't learned the rules yet. "You can use this one," he said, opening a door near the back of the house. It wasn't the bedroom I'd slept in when I helped pay for this place, not the one with the window that caught the morning light. This room was smaller, narrow, a leftover space. The kind of room that tells you, without words, how permanent your stay is meant to be. I stepped inside. A bed, a dresser that didn't quite match. No pictures on the wall. The air felt still, like it hadn't been disturbed in a while. "It's just temporary," he added, "until things settle." I nodded. I'd been nodding a lot lately. For the first few days, he didn't say anything else. I unpacked slowly, folded my clothes, lined my shoes neatly by the door the way I always had. I tried to make myself small, contained, easy to ignore. Then one afternoon, as he passed by the open doorway, he stopped. He didn't come in. He just stood there, hand on the door frame, eyes scanning the room like he was evaluating a rental property. "Hey," he said, not unkindly. "We should talk about something." I waited. "Your room," he continued, shifting his weight. "It kind of smells." The word landed heavier than it should have. "Smells?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, waving a hand vaguely. "Not bad exactly, just hospital-like, you know. Old fabric, medication, that sort of thing." He said it casually, practically, as if he were discussing a leaky faucet. "I'm having people over more often now," he added. "I don't want it to drift into the hallway." I stood there, feeling heat rise in my face, not anger, not yet. Something closer to shame. "Oh," I said, "I didn't realize." "It's not a big deal," he replied quickly. "I just want the house to feel clean." Clean. That night, I showered longer than usual, scrubbed my skin until it was pink and sensitive. I washed my clothes, even the ones I hadn't worn, and hung them separately. I checked my shoes, my blankets, my pillow. The next morning, when I opened my door, there was a candle sitting on the small table outside my room. Minimalist glass, white label. The scent read, "Clean linen." I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. I didn't light it. I just held it there, feeling its smooth weight in my palm. It wasn't about the smell. It was about the message. This space needed correcting. And so did I. Over the next week, things shifted quietly. My suitcase disappeared into the garage to make room. A chair I'd moved into the living room was returned to the corner of my bedroom. Conversations started happening around me instead of with me. I became careful with my movements, with my presence. I closed doors softly. I avoided lingering in shared spaces. I learned which hours were safest to make tea without feeling in the way. At night, lying in that narrow bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when a home stopped being a place you belonged and started being a place you were tolerated. He never said the word again. He didn't have to. The candle stayed there, unlit most days. A quiet reminder that I was something to be managed, masked, kept from spreading. And that was when I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. I hadn't been moved into a room. I had been moved out of my place. And whatever I still thought I was in this family, it wasn't father anymore. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part people don't understand. You don't wake up one morning and realize you've been erased. It happens in pieces. Small adjustments, reasonable requests. Things that make sense on their own, until they don't. It started with favors. "Can you pick up Eli from school today? I'm running late. Could you throw something together for dinner? Do you mind folding the laundry while I finish this call?" I said yes every time. Of course I did. Saying yes felt like proof that I still belonged, that I still had a role. Soon the favors stopped sounding like questions. They became statements, dropped into the air as he walked past me, phone pressed to his ear, already moving on to the next thing. I became part of the background noise of the house. The hum of the dishwasher, the kettle heating on the stove. Useful, but unnoticed unless something went wrong. I stopped sitting in the living room during the evenings, not because anyone told me to, but because I could feel when my presence made the room quieter, like conversation had to step around me. The chair I'd dragged out there one afternoon was gone the next day. Back in my room. No comment, no explanation. At dinner, they talked over me. Not rudely, just efficiently. Schedules, deadlines, plans that didn't include me even when they involved my time. "I'll need you to watch Eli Saturday," he said once, not looking up from his plate. I nodded automatically, then paused. "What time?" I asked. He glanced at me, surprised, not angry, just puzzled, like I'd asked an unnecessary question. "All day," he said. "I'll text you the details." That was when it hit me. I wasn't being treated like a father. I was being treated like someone who helped. I handled school pickups, doctor's appointments, grocery runs. I memorized their routines better than my own. I knew which light switches creaked, which cabinets stuck, which times of day I should stay out of the way. I learned to move quietly. I waited until the house was empty before making phone calls. I timed my meals so I wouldn't interrupt theirs. I took shorter showers. I kept my door closed. One evening, I overheard him on the phone in the next room. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "He's fine. Just staying with us for now. Helps out." Helps out. Not my dad. Not family. Just helps out. I stood there holding a clean towel, unsure where to put it. Then I folded it again, even though it was already neat, and carried it back to my room. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time someone had asked me what I wanted. Not what I could do. Not what I was able to handle. Just what I wanted. The answer didn't come easily. When you spend enough time shrinking, you forget the size you used to be. And somewhere between the quiet dinners and the unasked questions, I realized something painful and undeniable. I wasn't losing my place in the house. I had already lost it. Whatever I still was to him, it wasn't a father. It was something far easier to replace. The decision didn't come in a burst of anger. It came quietly, on a morning that looked exactly like every other morning. The house was empty. He'd already left for work. The silence felt rehearsed, like it had been practicing for the day I wouldn't be there anymore. I stood in the kitchen holding my mug, staring at the small crack along the rim. I'd been meaning to throw it out for months. I hadn't. Some things stay not because they're useful, but because they're familiar. I carried the mug back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The narrow one. The temporary one that had become permanent without anyone ever saying the words. That's when I saw the envelope again. Not the one he'd handed me, a different one. Thicker, yellowed at the edges. My handwriting on the front, written years ago when my hands were steadier and my back didn't ache in the mornings. Property documents. I'd tucked it away when I moved in, telling myself I wouldn't need it, that this was family, that love didn't require paperwork. I slid the envelope open. The deed was still there. My name was still there. Every page, every signature. I hadn't lost everything. I'd just forgotten what I still had. I sat there longer than I meant to, the papers spread across my lap, feeling something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not rage, not grief, clarity. I thought about the envelope he'd given me, the words inside it. Dad, I'm not your son. And I finally understood something he hadn't meant to teach me. If he could decide I wasn't his father anymore, then I could decide who I was going to be. I wasn't done. I wasn't invisible. And I wasn't obligated to disappear quietly. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back in the envelope. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I made a list. Not of chores, not of favors, but of things that were still mine. My name, my choices, my time, my dignity. At the bottom, I added one more thing: my future. Later that afternoon, he called. "Can you stay home tomorrow?" he asked. "I've got a long day." I looked around the room. The narrow bed, the closed door, the candle still sitting outside, unlit. "No," I said. There was a pause. "No?" he repeated, like he hadn't heard correctly. "I have plans," I said. And for the first time, I didn't explain myself. "What plans?" he asked. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Just plans." I hung up before he could respond. That night, I slept deeper than I had in months. Not because things were resolved, but because something inside me had shifted back into place. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing. And if you're still listening, let me ask you something, quietly, honestly. Have you ever realized that the people who benefited most from your sacrifices were the first to forget them? Or that staying silent too long can make others believe you were always meant to be small? If this story feels familiar, you're not alone. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remember that you're still alive. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. It was the same building I'd walked into years ago after my wife passed. Same narrow hallway, same crooked frame on the wall. Back then I'd come in broken, asking what I had to do next. This time I walked in standing straight. "Good to see you," he said, rising from behind his desk. "What can I help you with?" I didn't sit right away. I took a breath first, like I needed my body to catch up with the decision my mind had already made. "I need to know exactly where I stand," I said. "With my house, with my money, with my choices." He didn't look surprised. That alone told me more than words ever could. We went through the paperwork slowly. The deed, the accounts, the clauses I'd skimmed years ago and never thought I'd need to revisit. He spoke plainly. No drama, no judgment. "You still own the property outright," he said, tapping the page. "You were generous. You were trusting. But you didn't give it away." I nodded. I already knew. Hearing it out loud just made it real. "And if I wanted to sell?" I asked. "You can," he replied. "Tomorrow if you wanted." The room went quiet for a moment. Not heavy, just honest. "What about expectations?" I asked. "Family pressure?" He leaned back, folding his hands. "That's not a legal issue," he said gently. "That's a personal one." I smiled at that. It was the first time anyone had separated the two for me. By the time I left, the sun was high and bright. The kind of afternoon that makes you feel like the world is wider than the rooms you've been shrinking yourself to fit inside. I didn't go home right away. I walked. Past a cafe I used to love. Past a small park where parents pushed swings and kids screamed with laughter. I sat on a bench and watched life move without needing anything from me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel behind. That evening, When I walked back into the house, he was in the kitchen. "Where'd you go?" he asked casually. "I had an appointment," I said. "With who?" I met his eyes, not defiantly, just honestly. "That's not something I need permission for." He blinked, thrown off. Not angry, confused, like the rules had shifted without his consent. "Are you upset about something?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm clear." He didn't know what to do with that. I went to my room and closed the door. Not quietly this time, not apologetically, just normally, like someone who belonged to themselves. That night, I pulled the candle off the table outside my door and placed it in a drawer. Not out of spite, just because I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't planning my escape in secret. I was planning my life in daylight. And if you've stayed with me this far, let me ask you something. One last thing for today. When was the last time you asked yourself what you wanted and didn't immediately follow it with an apology? If this chapter stirred something in you, sit with it. You don't have to act yet, but don't ignore it. Some awakenings are quiet, and they change everything. I didn't move out that week, or the week after. Life doesn't change that neatly. He still passed my door in the mornings, still asked questions that weren't really questions, still assumed my time was available, even after I'd stopped giving it freely. And I let some things go, not because I was weak, but because I was choosing my battles. The paperwork sat in my drawer, untouched but present, a quiet truth waiting for the right moment. I didn't threaten. I didn't announce. I didn't demand apologies that might never come. I learned something important in those days. You don't always need closure to move forward. Sometimes clarity is enough. One evening I overheard him on the phone again. "No," he said. "He's different lately." Different. He didn't say it with irritation this time. He said it like someone noticing a door that no longer opened the way it used to. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just finished. Finished explaining. Finished shrinking. Finished waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't know yet where I would go or how long it would take. I only knew this. Whatever happened next would be on my terms. And maybe one day he'd understand what he'd thrown away. Or maybe he wouldn't. Not every story ends with forgiveness. Some end with distance. And sometimes that's the kindest ending of all.